Blackshaw is the head of digital at Nestlé, and we are here to talk about digital transformation for 20 minutes. So Pete, when did you arrive at Nestlé? Because when you arrived at Nestlé, it was like not such a digital group, it's an amazing global group. What is the first thing you did when you arrived?
Well, in fairness, there's a lot of digital activity at Nestlé. I think part of the role of the chief digital officer is to really curate the content, so to speak, and ensure that it's circulating, it's working against best practices, and the first thing I try to do is really build a community, which for Nestlé is a bit of a challenge. We're a radically decentralized company. We have 340,000 employees, fragmented across multiple markets, and several thousand brands, and so there's a lot to curate. So the first piece is like, how do you just build a community of brand builders and identify a few early wins and keep the frameworks really, really simple. So we developed a digital strategy based on 3 pillars, and we're still disciplined to it: listening, engaging, inspiring, transforming. Listening is about how do we reinvent the way we absorb signals to drive action. Engaging is really about next generation CRM, community management and the like. And the transforming, it's kind of similar to what we heard from Bonnet earlier about how do you change the enterprise? How do you transform it? How do you think about digital as much as an operating principle as a communications channel?
And this morning you told me about friction, and you told me like we don't want to solve tension, we want to manage them. Can you talk a little bit about that? Managing tensions?
If you strip all the buzzwords off, what we do, digital, social media, at the end of the day, we're training leaders. And we're training leaders to adapt and thrive and create value in a highly disruptive environment. And what I focus on with all of the brand builders and members of our digital acceleration team, I emphasize that it's really important to understand how to manage, not resolve tension. In business, we always are looking to resolve tension, black or white, absolute, but everything in digital is a tension point. The big one is stimulation versus integration. Should digital be standalone or should it be integrated? The answer is yes and yes. ROI versus intuition. Sometimes we feel like we need data to find the bathroom, when in fact there's a lot of intuition that can drive really smart decisions. But it's not one or the other. You have to identify these, what I call digital dualisms, these tension points that you need to manage. What I've generally found, having been close to hundreds of leaders across Nestlé, is that the leaders that understand how to manage tension move the fastest in the organization. And at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want to create world-class business leaders, and digital is the context to do that.
I really liked the thing that I read about you, about going back to the fundamentals, because, well, what I've seen with a lot of groups and a lot of brands is that usually they are going like in this fast pace, running after the last ad, like Vine or Snapchat or whatever, and your statement is, well, fundamentals are very, very important. There are fundamentals. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I say fundamentals are fundamental, and it's okay to follow the new utilities and the new buzzword, but it has to be anchored to brand fundamentals, and they haven't fundamentally changed. And I was attracted to Nestlé. They have a world-class brand building framework called Brand Building the Nestlé Way, and there's a number of rooms: know your consumer deeply, create engaging brand experiences, win with shoppers. And to make digital work in an organization, you have to demonstrate to your management, especially your middle managers, that digital is the ultimate vitamin to bring those brand building principles to life. If you build it too much on the sidelines, it may work in a flash, but it's not sustainable. So I'll give a good example. Message quality matters, right? Social media, buzz marketing, it's not going to correct bad messaging. So if you've got good messaging on the front end, grounded to great insights, you're going to get disproportionately rewarded in a world of technology-driven amplification. But you've got to get the fundamentals down pat. And yes, there are instances where brands have driven a lot of engagement on platforms like Facebook and Twitter that aren't building the business because they didn't start with the right fundamentals on the front end. And so, that to me is an absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for being a world-class, digitally powered brand builder.
Also, what we discussed together, there's something which is very, very important about digital is that usually we talk a lot about marketing and communication, but it is a common knowledge that this is the tip of the iceberg. In fact, digital is changing the global company. Can you talk about the implication of digital within the company, but marketing and communication, which is like pretty obvious?
Yeah, I mean, I am a fanatical believer that digital is as much an operating principle as it is a communications channel. What I mean by that is it's better, faster, more adaptive, more fluid, more real-time. It's always on, and that has massive organizational implications. That has huge implications for speed to market. That has massive implications for how we think about, getting world-class insights faster, leveraging data signals. And, I spend a huge amount of my time thinking about things like how do I get Nestlé brand builders in a radically fragmented network to talk to one another using social media on the inside. And if I can achieve that objective, I think there's going to be a lot of dividends beyond. We have an internal social media network that very much like Facebook, but it's inside Nestlé with over 200,000 brand builders. I manage a community of 3,500 digital leaders, the people that are interested in digital, and I publish every day. And I meticulously measure the likes, the comments, the shares, the engagement, whether top executives are paying attention to what I say. I'm looking for informal sources of value that are popping up amongst the ranks, because there is a certain digital Darwinism that applies internally in communication flows. But the idea is, like, how do you change the way the organization teaches itself? If you think about what makes digital, and social media in particular, so powerful, it's network effects. You've got radically distributed networks that are kind of talking to one another and moving knowledge to the top really, really fast. Why can't that work internally? So that's a big area. It's also a very selfish and practical endeavor because it's not like, a lot of us in digital, we don't have huge budgets. We may not even have a lot of people, so we have to be digital by design. Digital leaders are very efficient at making, limited resources scream. That's what I learned when I did a startup. You just get a dribble of money from your VCs, and you had to be incredibly efficient, so you always found yourself defaulting to the digital solutions that were just very, very efficient by design.
Are you also thinking about digital within products, like a digital enhanced product within Nestlé?
Yeah, listen, I think everybody is thinking about how do you wrap service on top of product. That's why a lot of our food brands like Maggi have, I think, outstanding recipe engines or service models that sit on top of them. Nescafe is doing a lot of work along those lines as well. Is Nespresso a product or a service? Well, it depends. I bet half the people would divide up along those lines. And, it is an experience, and what you do with the website, what you do with the social interaction, what you do with the customer service is very, very important. And I'm not speculating and I'm not dancing in the fuzz here. We know from very, very meticulous analysis of earned media what drives the conversation, and experience is very, very important. And so the question is, how do we make sure that the product itself makes people want to talk about it, but what are the additional layers that we can put on top of it which add value to consumers' lives?
And you talked a little bit about the mindset of startups. I know that you're working a lot with startups. Can you give example? Can you explain also how a big group as Nestlé can work with startups, because it is not the same pace, it is not the same way of working, not the same time kind of teams.
Well, though I started at P&G, I did kind of take about 8 years off to kind of do the startup scene. So to some extent, I kind of brought a lot of that to Nestlé, and it's a great challenge. But we've also, like other companies, we spent time in innovation hubs like the Valley for places, whether it's London, Berlin, Shanghai, Beijing. There's a lot of hubs that are creating a very special brand of energy that I think companies need to stay very close to. And it's very important in marketing today to maintain a certain degree of humility about what you know and what you don't know. So we have been keeping our ear to the pulse of startup culture to inspire us, to motivate us, maybe even scare us a little bit, but in a very constructive way. I manage a Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost. Similar to what you heard in the previous presentation, we're open for business. If you have something that can enhance our brands or clusters of brands, we want to hear from you. And we're going to develop smarter systems for kind of getting you in the door. But yeah, it's very, very important. You know, probably the biggest inspiration when I, literally months after I got to Nestlé, brought some of the executives to the Valley, and we were really impressed with hack culture. Facebook, Google, even the smaller companies, and that's what inspired us to create the digital acceleration team. So we tried to create a little bit of a startup carve-out right above our executive suite, literally right above our executive suite, and that's had a profound impact. And now it's cascaded into 13 different markets, and it's one of the most exciting things about my job. You know, because I have the benefits of a large company, because there's a lot of things Nestlé has done really, really well over the years. We're nearly 150 years old. But we're also kind of created pockets of entrepreneurialism that I think are going to lead to some very, very promising outcomes.
Do you have an example of a startup that you are working with and that is a very, very interesting experience for Nestlé?
We were at Pinterest when they were practically early on, and that kind of, one of some of the advantages of working early with these players is that you get in on early on the ad model. We've co-developed with them. We've got some very, very impressive results in terms of testing their promoted pin model. There's a number of players in the social content management system that we've worked very, very early with. As you know from our positioning, we're focusing very heavily on the nutrition, health, and wellness space. So we're actually focusing on startups in that particular area who can really kind of help us, complete that goal. And so, but many, many examples. I mean, our outpost has been up and running about 18 months, and we've probably touched hundreds of companies, and we hope to step it up even more.
Right. One statement, maybe you will tell me if you agree with. I believe that digital transformation is mostly human resources thing. Like you have to have people that understand the mindset, because it's mostly a question of mindset. How do you deal with that? I mean, how do you make sure that people within the company, and you have a lot of employees, like thousands, how do you make sure they're all on the same pace and on the same mindset?
Fundamentals are fundamental. I think it all comes down to leadership. I mean, I think leaders are very comfortable breaking down barriers, driving cross-functional interaction, and leading others to the destination or the business results. And so, I think the first criteria is just cultivate really strong leaders. I think leaders naturally gravitate to opportunity, and digital is an opportunity that is just staring us in the face, loudly, and so they're going to be there. Plus, they're all doing it anyways in their personal lives, so that connecting the dots isn't that difficult. But that's the key thing. I think it's the qualities of leadership, because as I said earlier, this is a pretty tough space. It's not like there's a playbook you can pull off the shelf and say, this is the way I do digitally powered brand building. Yes, there are case studies, ad campaign case studies, but really moving the organization, it's pretty tough. So I think strong leaders inevitably kind of work their way through the tension and the ambiguity and get there, and that's what we need to look for.
So you first educate somehow the leaders, and you also have this program in Switzerland where some people are coming to really embrace digital, better understand it. And we've been talking about that this morning with one person who is in France, actually. And
Armand, where are you?
Exactly, I don't know where he is. Oh,
there he is.
Can you talk maybe a little bit about that program and maybe his experience, because that, I think, is very interesting for others?
Yeah, kind of going back to what I said, we went to the Valley and we said, could we emulate hack culture in Switzerland, by the lake, in the large company? And it almost sounded, like the impossible, challenge. But we created a program, and here's how it works. We we encourage people to apply for 8-month rotations in the center, 12 at a time. We probably get about 4 times as many applications as spaces. Puts a lot of pressure on me to create a world-class leadership program, and I have to keep raising the bar. They come, they do intensive training, they get assigned to brands like Nescafé and others to kind of work on not just their digital strategy, but their brand strategy. They help us operationalize community management, and they do a lot of hackathons. Philippe, who's out in the front, who's now running digital for Nestlé Waters globally down the street, he was a member of the first DAT, and he led a whole bunch of hacks on very interesting questions like, how do we mobilize food services? Or how do we take the concept of Nestlé's CSV, our version of social responsibility, and use digital to take that to the next level? And it's had a very important impact. And one thing I would tell all of you, never underestimate the power of organizational virality. If you hit a winning idea, it will move fast. We started the DAP program a little over 2 years ago. We've got 13 similar programs in our markets. They all bring a different variant to the model. In India, they do a wonderful job combining agencies with the DAP members. In Italy, they bring the shopper folks together. It's all different, and we kind of have now created this ecosystem. But again, like, how do you create kind of an island or islands of startup culture in a large company, but with the goal of making the digital piece obsolete? Because at the end of the day, I need to make my job obsolete. I want everyone to be digital by design. And that should always be the goal, because digital powers everything. It's just that we're in a heavy stimulation mode right now.
Okay, my last question, and if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to use the app, because I'm going to have sometimes, yeah, they're awesome. So my last question is very easy to ask, very complicated to answer. Imagine a group, like a global group, who hasn't touched digital at all, which doesn't exist really, but still, which is in a very early stage in the digital transformation. What would be the very best advice that you can give them? Like first step, first move, what would it be?
Starting in this area.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a big believer in, listening is so important. And maybe I'm a little biased. I started a listening company that I sold to Nielsen. But I think this notion of understanding, I believe the conversation and the data signals are infinitely revealing of brand value. The ability to understand unarticulated consumer need, unmet opportunities, and really understanding that, not only about your brand, but about your category and life stage, is a very important starting point. I think too often in marketing we jump to the marketing campaign and not to the insight. So I'd say, get the listening piece right, and there's a volume of data. Bonin, I think, articulated that so well in the earlier conversation about that. It's not just about big data, it's just all the data streams unpack brand value, whether it's the database of intentions through search, whether it's the clickstream analysis in terms of why consumers go from one place to another on a website, to the conversation, which continues to get more interesting. And I think in 2015, it's starting to become much more visualized. It's kind of moving from text to the world of Pinterest and Instagram, which may provide a whole different value, but getting that listening piece right is the starting point of wisdom, in my view.
There were a few questions about human resources. One was, how do you make sure that people trust you? It was like, I don't know what it is, but whatever. How do you make sure that people understand that digital is part of their job, even though there's not digital in the name of the description job? How do you make sure that they trust that digital is very important for their job, but also that they should embrace it, that if they don't really agree?
Listen, I think if you embrace this notion that it's fundamentally an operating principle, better, faster, cheaper, smarter, then everyone benefits from digital DNA. And again, what's unique today is that we're all doing it. It's not like, it's not like in the 50s people were creating TV commercials in their free time. But for all of us that are in the marketing community, we're doing it in our free time. When we go from work, we're going on to Facebook, we're going on to Twitter, we're creating blogs, we're uploading photos of our families. And to some extent, the digital context is across everything we do. So we just need to build simple bridges between our everyday activity and what we need to do in business. And then suddenly you realize it's not just about Pete's job. It's everyone has an opportunity to turn this into a vitamin to create more value within their enterprise.
There was a question about the KitKat crisis, asking how you handle it, but I believe you were not with Nestlé at that time. It's a Nestlé crisis. My question, maybe if you, I don't think you were there at that time in 2010, but what has been the impact of this crisis on the Nestlé group? That would be interesting also.
Well, just as perspective, shortly before I arrived, we had an issue with Greenpeace, and there were kind of two fundamental issues. One was, I think, a very legitimate issue around supply chain sourcing of palm oil. And again, one thing you need to remember is that no amount of PR or social media management is going to erase the core foundations of an issue like that. So that issue was kind of brought up where I say we had a teachable moment. was the way we managed the conversation on Facebook, which led to a backlash. We kind of deployed legal authority to kind of, get rid of the videos. And of course, those things just don't work, and they create all sorts of issues. Hey, listen, I think what we've learned, and I got to be careful with the word learn, because none of us have really cracked the code. This is a very complicated space, but I think we've made major efforts to better resource around online community management, which I think is an absolutely critical skill. And to do so 24/7, so it's not just on our hours, it's on the consumer's hours, and also to try to speak with a much more empathetic voice to the consumer. And that is easier said than done, because most of us are struggling on how do we scale bodies around all this conversation. But I think it was a very healthy experience. It probably impacted the creation of my job. That's how severe it was. And I think we should all try to take those teachable moments and turn those into opportunities, and we're still learning.
Thanks very much, Pete, for this open conversation. Well, it's very, very fascinating what you're saying, but the time is over, so we have to leave now. Thanks very much, Pete. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening.